Hi, today's drawing video is on something I refer to as the logic of light. There are kind of these rules that exist for how light describes form. Certain things always exist, and I'm going to point those things out. The first thing is we have a light source, a directed light source, and I've got a setup over here in the corner where I've darkened kind of this area so that I can see the light really clearly. And it's in a certain position here, kind of upper left, kind of to the side, a little to the front of these objects, but mostly to the side. And then I set up a few objects here that I will draw and talk about kind of the logic of light. Now, the quality of the surface, like this is like a shiny plastic object, that's going to have an effect on how light reflects off of it versus something that's a little bit more satiny and something that's really quite matte. So I've got kind of three different textures here, and you can kind of see how light hits them, right? Where the highlight, right, where is the strongest point, right, on this, because it's reflective, I'm actually seeing the bulb and the light itself reflected in the brightest spot on that funnel. Here, because this is a golf ball and has all these dimples on it, I see they're not quite as bright because it's not reflective. It's a little bit more satin in terms of its surface, but I see little white spots on probably 8 several little dimples, and so I have little different light reflections. And on this, I don't see any bright single hot spots, so to speak, but I do see the brightest portion, which is kind of like the planar edge of this kind of wooden paddle. And I see, again, at the top, but probably the brightest right here at the front, right? Which is the closest, most direct place that's getting hit by the light source. So if I'm going to be drawing that funnel, let's say, and I'm going to kind of describe it really here, and I'm just going to use some kind of charcoal. Let's see, I'm going to use this piece of charcoal. I'm going to look at the darks and the lights in terms of shapes, right? I see darkness behind the brightest part of the brightest side of the funnel, right? So I can kind of like go like this, right? Create that contour edge, right? And I can kind of go in and I can kind of darken, right, that area, smudge it out a little bit. I'm going to do this really kind of quick for you so you see that. So that's like that left side. The background behind the highlight side or contour edge of your object is always going to be darker. Always look to the background. It'll kind of give you kind of clues. The foreground here, where I see the funnel as it kind of curves around, right? It's light and light, but I see a little bit of the edge, usually underneath your objects where they meet the surface is usually kind of the darkest spot, right? Like right at the center of that bottom of the sphere, right there where it sits right against it. That's the darkest value kind of in kind of a drawing about light. If I look at the top of the funnel right here, I see it's a little bit darker behind the top of the spout. But now on this side, right, we call that the shadow side, right, of the form, the darkness is not in the background anymore, right? It's on the funnel itself, on like the cylindrical part of that funnel, right? So I'm darkening the shadow side, right? Now, right, the funnel will kind of, the shadow side of the funnel coming this way, right? I can kind of darken that a little bit. Now, you see the curve of the volume of the funnel there, the curve of the form. When we deal with kind of curved forms, there's something that we refer to as like the crest shadow or the core shadow, and that's usually kind of like a shadow that falls on the object itself, right, between the highlight side, the brightest side of the object, and the the shadow side of the object, but on the other side of that core shadow or crest shadow, there it is, right? There's that core shadow. On the other side of that, and that core shadow is usually not super dark, right? It's kind of a dim kind of shadow compared to kind of like our cast shadows, which we'll talk about in a second. But on the other side of that, we have we have a dim light, right? It's not as bright as the highlight, right? But it's there because that's the reflected light. That's light that bounces back from other surfaces surrounding that object, right? So I'm going to take out another piece of charcoal here that'll get me darker surfaces here in a second, right? So there we go. I'm going to kind of gradate this out a little bit more, right? So it's a little bit of a softer transition between the core shadow and then here. If I really get into the highlight on this, right, I have to isolate the light and then darken it a little bit around, right? That's just because of the surface, it has a reflection to it. Right, now, up here inside my funnel, I also have a little bit of what we call cast shadow, right? Which is any form blocks light, and we haven't talked about that. So if the light's coming from the upper left-hand side, hitting the object here, well, the shadow that's cast, that because of the light's blocking, is always the opposite side of the form. So it's right over on this side. And because this is a funnel, it's going to be kind of tapering to kind of a point. And depending on the length of the shadow, it tells you kind of how high or how low the light is in relation to your object, right? If it's low, right, long cast shadows. If it's higher, the shadows are shorter, right? So now I'm going to take my compressed charcoal because it's going to allow me to get a little bit darker, right? Because through this, that's a little bit darker, and through here. Here at the spout, right? Now be careful, the values themselves will get darker if your object is dark. This is a white plastic funnel, right? So the values are never going to get super dark, right? They're going to stay relatively light. You only get them in where it sits, certain parts of this, definitely maybe right back here in a little bit of the cast shadow is going to get dark, maybe right in there, but it's going to be relatively subtle and soft, right? And as far as background goes, you can always take and gradate, soften the background, right? So that it's not so abrupt. Jim Dine, the artist, is really known for kind of how he always kind of plays with the background all around the objects that he draws. I'm going to go in and I'm going to darken maybe the crest, the core shadow a little bit more through here. So, but you really kind of do get a sense of light and how it kind of falls on objects, right? By knowing where the light source is, where the highlight side of your form is, where the reflected light side of your form is, and it's that core crest shadow that really gives that illusion of 3-dimension, right, to your drawing, right? If you had everything but that core shadow, you would not have the 3-dimensionality that you get when you include that, right? It really makes a huge difference. So a sphere, would be, again, another round volume. If I just drew it kind of up here, I'm not drawing this in relation to this, I'm just using the paper. But if I drew a sphere, right, remember the darkest part would be right underneath, right, where it sits, right? Then you'd have the cast shadow of the sphere over here, right? And that would be that, right? Then you would have your core. I can see my kind of core. It follows the curve of the form, right? So there's my kind of core shadow running in that direction around my sphere. And then on the other side of my core shadow, right, reflected light. So it's not that bright, it's kind of a dim light, right? And then actually here, I'm noticing it's like up here, the sphere is darker than the shadow as it comes around. But here, it's lighter than that part of the, right? And as we move our way up and around, the sphere, we get to that highlight area, right? Which is again gonna be kind of right up, kind of in here. That's where the light is gonna be the brightest. And if I wanted to make it look like it was dimpled, I'd have to use the dots of light to go in here and make this even darker. Shadows a little darker through here. All right, so that really kind of gives it that roundness, that volume, that dimensionality. Always paying attention to those rules of light, being highlight, core or crest shadow, which follows the form on the object, reflected light on the opposite side of that, and then cast shadow, which is the light that gets blocked by the object from the source. So I hope you enjoyed this. Light is one of my favorite things to kind of try to capture in drawing, and also remember in charcoal, right? It's a material that can be lifted so easily with an eraser. So don't be afraid if you go too dark to go right back into it with an eraser and kind of pull up some of it, right? If you think you've kind of gone too dark, right, with the part of the background, let's say, I just softened it and kind of lightened it up, right, but left it kind of dark right up until that edge, right? So don't be afraid, use your eraser. It's a great tool, not just to fix mistakes, but to use as a way of subtractively making kind of marks. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.